I never imagined the day I would set fire to my own marriage would begin with a simple discovery in the glove compartment of my husband's car. There it was, a half-used tube of personal lubricant, carelessly tossed beside faded insurance papers and old receipts. My pulse quickened, my throat dried, and in that instant I knew, 40 years of vows, Sunday dinners, and shared memories were hanging by a thread slick with betrayal. I slipped the tube back as if it were radioactive, my hands trembling but my mind razor sharp. I didn't confront him. I didn't scream. Instead, I smiled through breakfast the next morning, pouring his coffee the way I had for decades, all the while carrying the weight of a secret that would shatter the illusion of our perfect life. Outwardly, I was Evelyn Carter, the devoted wife, the baker everyone in Maplewood adored. Inside, I was a storm gathering strength, calculating my next move. That night the silence in our house felt suffocating. It wasn't the peaceful kind of silence you share with someone you love. It was thick, hostile, as if the walls themselves knew the truth before I did. I sat at the kitchen table, my fingers drumming against the oak surface, while the old clock ticked with a rhythm that mocked me. Every second was a reminder of years invested in a man I was beginning to realize I had never truly known. When Richard stumbled in from another so-called business dinner, his tie loosened and his face lined with guilt, I watched him with the dispassionate curiosity of a scientist studying a specimen. He smelled of expensive cologne, but beneath it, faint yet undeniable, lingered a woman's floral perfume. Not mine, not any perfume I had ever owned. He collapsed on the bed without a word, and minutes later his snores filled the house. Once a lullaby, now a cruel anthem of deceit. I wandered through the mess he left behind, his jacket draped carelessly on the sofa, his wallet half open, his phone glowing with a notification. Richard always claimed technology was too complicated for him, that he preferred a good old-fashioned phone call. Yet here was an email, sitting bold on the screen, daring me to look. I tapped it open, my breath caught in my chest. "You were incredible tonight, Dad." The words sliced through me like glass. My vision blurred, my body went cold, and for a moment I forgot how to breathe. Dad, who was calling my husband that? And in such an intimate tone? My hands shook as I scrolled for more. But the address was gibberish, untraceable. Still, the meaning was clear enough. I stared down the hallway at his sleeping form, his face serene, his chest rising and falling with the rhythm of a man at peace. My own heart pounded with the fury of a trapped animal. 40 years of trust, of sacrifice, of standing beside him through thick and thin, now unraveling with the click of a button. I tucked the phone back, careful not to leave a trace, and laughed bitterly under my breath. To the world, Richard Carter was a respectable husband, a successful businessman. To me, in that moment, he became a stranger. Worse, a traitor hiding under the same roof, in the same bed, wrapped in the same memories we had built together. And I knew this was just the beginning. The next morning, the house carried that same heavy silence, the kind that made the air feel thick, like smoke after a fire. I brewed coffee out of habit, but even the aroma that once wrapped our mornings in comfort now turned bitter in my nostrils. Richard sat at the table, his eyes bleary, his voice hoarse as he mumbled something about an important meeting in Dallas. He didn't meet my gaze. He didn't need to. I had already begun to see through him. When he left, I gathered the clothes he had carelessly discarded the night before. As I shook out his slacks, a folded slip of paper fluttered to the ground. I bent down and picked it up, my stomach clenching as if it already knew what I was about to find. A receipt. The Silver Rose Steakhouse, San Antonio, not Dallas, not even close. My eyes scanned the details. Dinner for two. A $180 bottle of Cabernet Sauvignon, the very same wine he bought me for our 10th anniversary. A wine I hadn't tasted in over a decade. My hands shook as I remembered that night. His smile across the flickering candlelight. The toast we made to forever. What a sick joke. Now, forever belonged to someone else. I slipped the receipt into my apron pocket like contraband and continued with the motions of cleaning. His phone buzzed once on the counter, but he had already taken it with him. I exhaled sharply, grateful and resentful at the same time. I didn't want more words to haunt me. Not yet. That evening, when the sun dipped below the rooftops of Maplewood Lane, I made my way to the garage. The smell of gasoline and rubber greeted me. But it wasn't those familiar scents that stopped me cold. It was something sweeter, sharper, clinging faintly to the fabric of the passenger seat, perfume. Not my rosewater fragrance. Something brazen and floral, loud and unapologetic. I pulled open the glove compartment, and my fingers brushed against the slick plastic tube again. This time, I pulled it out fully. The cap was crusted with residue, unmistakable in its implication. My hands trembled so badly I nearly dropped it. But I forced myself to stare at it, to hold the truth in my palm. Richard hadn't touched me in years. He always claimed he was too tired, too old, too stressed. And yet here it was, the evidence of passion, of desire, spent somewhere else. On someone else. I shoved the tube back inside, wiping my hands on a napkin until my skin felt raw. My knees nearly buckled, but I wasn't done. I searched the backseat methodically, my flashlight sweeping across crumpled napkins stained with lipstick and that same alien perfume. Proof after proof, a grotesque collage of betrayal. I photographed everything with my phone. Each click of the shutter a small act of war. Evidence, insurance, ammunition. I wasn't ready to confront him, not yet, but I needed the truth laid out before me like weapons in an armory. When I finally closed the car door, the garage seemed to spin. My breaths came shallow, but there was no turning back. The pieces were falling into place. The email, the receipt, the perfume, the tube of lubricant, all of it pointed to a reality too cruel to ignore. I walked back into the house, the walls pressing in on me, every family photo on the mantel mocking me with smiles that no longer belonged to the truth. I had built a life with Richard Carter. Brick by brick, loaf by loaf, sacrifice by sacrifice, and now it was crumbling. Not with a sudden crash, but with a steady, merciless unraveling. I sat at the kitchen table once again, my phone glowing in my hand. I stared at the photos I had just taken, my throat tight, my heart pounding. There was no denying it anymore. My husband wasn't just slipping away. He was already gone. I sat alone at the kitchen table long after the sun went down. The dim bulb above me humming faintly, casting long shadows that stretched across the linoleum floor. My bakery invoices lay untouched beside me, but I couldn't read a single number. My hands trembled too violently. The photographs on my phone glared back at me, the receipt, the napkins soaked in perfume, the tube of lubricant glistening like some grotesque trophy of betrayal. 40 years of marriage. 40 years of believing in a man who swore he'd be my partner through everything, through sickness, through poverty, through the endless nights of flour-dusted sweat in that bakery kitchen. Now, every vow we made under the San Diego sun all those decades ago felt like a cruel performance. A script I had memorized while he rehearsed another role behind my back. My chest ached as if my ribs themselves were splintering under the weight of it. I pressed my palm hard against my sternum, hoping the pressure might keep me from collapsing. The silence of the house mocked me again, broken only by the faint snore drifting from our bedroom. That sound, once my comfort, now felt like an insult. A lullaby for fools. I wanted to scream, to storm into the bedroom, rip the blankets from his body, and hurl every accusation that burned my tongue. But what would that give me? Another lie, another excuse. Richard was a master of performance. He could twist words like ribbon, shape reality with that charming smile everyone in town admired. No, screaming would not give me truth. It would only tip my hand. And I needed the truth. I needed it in black and white. In photos and recordings, undeniable and permanent, not just for me, but for Michael, our son. For the family name. For the bakery I had built with my bare hands. For every ounce of sweat and sacrifice I had poured into this life. A lump rose in my throat. I thought of Michael in his fire chief's uniform, pride shining in his eyes when he visited the bakery, telling me, "Mom, you're the strongest woman I know." What would it do to him to learn that his father wasn't a man of strength, but of weakness? That his wife, Vanessa, might be tangled in this web of deceit? My stomach churned violently at the thought, bile creeping up the back of my throat. I couldn't bear to humiliate my son with only suspicions. I needed proof so sharp, so devastating, that even Richard's silver tongue couldn't cut around it. With shaking hands, I picked up my phone and scrolled to Clara Johnson's number. She was an old friend. One of the few I trusted with my soul. Years ago, over coffee, she had once whispered, "If you ever need to know the truth, Evelyn, I know a man. Discreet, reliable, the kind of man who doesn't flinch when lies get ugly." I never imagined I would need that lifeline. But here I was, 40 years later, drowning in deceit, reaching for a rope. The phone rang twice before Clara answered, her warm voice instantly wrapping me in memories of simpler days. But tonight, my voice cracked as I forced the words out. "Clara, I need the number. The investigator. I can't live like this anymore." There was a pause, the kind of silence that carried sympathy deeper than words. Then, softly, she replied, "Evelyn, I'll send it right away." When the message arrived minutes later, I stared at the digits glowing on my screen. My vision blurred with tears I hadn't allowed myself to shed until now. My hand hovered above the call button. Trembling. This was it. The moment I stopped being the dutiful wife and became something else entirely, a woman ready to uncover the truth. No matter how much it destroyed me. I pressed the button, and with it, I felt the faintest spark of control ignite inside the wreckage of my heart. The cafe smelled of roasted beans and burnt sugar, the kind of scent that usually comforted me. But that afternoon it turned my stomach. I sat in a corner booth, back pressed against the wall, my hands wrapped tightly around a lukewarm mug I hadn't touched. Every time the bell above the door chimed, my heart lurched. When Detective Harris finally walked in, he was nothing like I had imagined. Not slick, not polished, just a man in a plain blue shirt. Shoulders square, eyes steady and unreadable. The kind of man who carried truths like burdens, not trophies. He slid into the seat across from me without asking, his presence quiet but immovable. Like a wall I had no choice but to face. "Mrs. Carter," he said simply, his voice low, the syllables heavy. I nodded, unable to trust my voice. My fingers fumbled as I pushed a flash drive across the table. Wrapped in a tissue as if it were contraband. Inside were the photos, the receipt, the perfume-soaked napkins, the lubricant. Each one felt like a nail I was hammering into my own coffin. "This is what I have," I whispered. "I think my husband is cheating." The words scraped my throat raw. To admit it out loud was to make it real. Harris didn't flinch. He opened his small leather notebook, scribbled something down, and tucked the drive into his pocket. His eyes, calm but sharp, scanned my face for a beat too long, as though measuring how much more I could take. "I'll start following him this afternoon," he said matter-of-factly. "Don't confront him. Don't change your routine. If you want the truth, let me bring it to you clean." I nodded again, though my chest felt like it was splitting apart. The truth. That word used to mean safety. Now it meant destruction. Hours later, back in the bakery, surrounded by the scent of flour and yeast, my phone buzzed. My hands were covered in dough. I wiped them quickly on my apron and snatched it up. Harris' name glowed on the screen. My heart rattled like a trapped bird. I opened the message and the world around me collapsed. A photograph filled the screen, grainy, distant, but unmistakable. Richard, in his light blue shirt. The same one he wore on Sundays. Walking into a restaurant. His hand wasn't empty. It was holding Vanessa's. Vanessa Moore, my daughter-in-law. The girl I had taught to make our family's flan recipe. The young woman I welcomed as a daughter when Michael brought her home. When she swore to love him. To build a life with him. And there she was. Her lips painted a crimson red I had never dared to wear. Her body leaning toward my husband like they shared a secret I could never be part of. My knees buckled. I dropped onto a stool behind the counter, clutching the phone so tightly my knuckles turned white. Another photo arrived, Richard pouring wine into her glass. Vanessa smiling, her hand brushing his across the table. Intimate, intentionally intimate. I had never seen Richard look at me that way. Not in years, maybe not ever. A sound tore from my throat. Half laugh, half sob. Customers glanced up from their coffee. Startled, but I didn't care. My whole world had cracked wide open, and all I could do was drown in the shards. The phone buzzed again, a short message from Harris. "This is just the beginning. I'll keep watching. Stay strong. Stay strong." Easy words for a man paid to watch from the shadows. For me, it was like asking a widow to stand tall at her husband's funeral. Because in that moment, staring at those photographs, I realized something had already died inside me. And what remained was no longer a wife. What remained was a woman sharpening her pain into vengeance. The photos haunted me for days. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Richard's hand on Vanessa's, the soft glow of candlelight catching her red lipstick, the secret curve of his smile. Betrayal burned hot, but beneath it grew something colder, heavier, fear. Fear that what I thought was only an affair was something much darker. My phone buzzed again late one night as I sat alone in the bakery. Invoices spread before me that I couldn't read. Detective Harris' name lit up the screen. I hesitated, my fingers trembling before I opened the message. This time it wasn't just a photo. It was a video. Through the grainy footage, I saw Richard and Vanessa leaning against the hood of his SUV in a dimly lit parking lot. Papers were spread across the windshield, fluttering in the night breeze. Vanessa held a red pen, her head bent close to Richard's, their voices barely audible until Harris' microphone caught them clear enough to shatter me. "Dad, hurry up with that fake contract," Vanessa whispered. Her voice was sharp, urgent, dripping with ambition. "I want that bakery chain in my name. I want her out of the house." Her words hit me like a physical blow. My stomach twisted, bile rising in my throat. Richard's reply was low, steady, confident. "Don't worry. Juliet doesn't know anything. She trusts me too much. Leave it to me." For a moment, the room spun. I gripped the edge of the bakery counter so tightly my nails dug into the wood. My throat closed up, and I gasped for air as if someone had wrapped a rope around my neck. It wasn't just lust. It wasn't just betrayal of the body. It was a conspiracy. They weren't content to lie in my bed, they wanted to steal the very life I had built. The business I had poured 4 decades into. The home that carried every memory of raising our son. I replayed the audio again, desperate to prove to myself I had heard wrong. But the words didn't change. That old hag, that was what Vanessa called me. The girl I had embraced like a daughter. The girl I taught to knead dough, to stir caramel for flan. Now spitting venom behind my back. Tears blurred my vision until the bakery lights shimmered. I felt smaller than I had in years. A child lost in her own life. The ovens hummed. The scent of yeast filled the air. But none of it grounded me. My world was tilting. My life hijacked by 2 people who should have been family. And then came the darkest thought of all, Michael. My son. The boy who once ran barefoot through this bakery, laughing with flour smeared on his cheeks. The man who now saved lives as a fire chief. How would he survive knowing the 2 people closest to him, his father and his wife, were conspiring not just against me, but against him too? My chest tightened until I thought I might collapse. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt truly terrified, not just of losing my marriage, not just of losing my bakery, but of losing my son, to grief, to rage, to a wound too deep to ever heal. I sank into a chair, clutching my phone to my chest like it was a lifeline. My hands shook uncontrollably, and a sob broke free, loud and ugly, echoing through the empty bakery. I had uncovered the truth. But instead of relief, all I felt was dread. Because now I knew, this wasn't just about infidelity. This was about survival. The night Richard stumbled into bed reeking of alcohol and lies, something inside me shifted. My grief had burned itself out, leaving only a cold, hard core of fury. I lay awake beside him, staring at the ceiling, listening to his steady snores. Each one was a hammer driving the nails of betrayal deeper into my chest. That was the moment I decided, I would not sit idle and let them strip me of my life. I would fight, but I wouldn't fight with screams or tears. I would fight with precision. When his breathing deepened, I slid quietly from the bed. The keys to his SUV glimmered faintly on the nightstand under the dim light. My hand trembled as I reached for them. But once they touched my palm, a strange calm settled over me. I was no longer the wife he thought he could fool. I was his reckoning. The garage was silent except for the creak of the door as I stepped inside. The SUV sat like a sleeping beast, the stale air still carrying traces of that floral perfume. My flashlight beam cut through the darkness, landing on the glove compartment. I pulled it open with steady hands. There it was again, the tube of lubricant. That obscene token of his betrayal. I held it for a long moment, turning it over in my hand. My reflection warped in the slick plastic. My chest tightened, but this time not from grief. From resolve. I carried it back into the kitchen, set it on the counter, and opened the drawer where I kept tools for the bakery. Among spatulas and measuring spoons sat a small, unassuming tube of industrial superglue, the kind I used to fix a broken chair months ago. I twisted the cap with deliberate care, the chemical scent sharp, stinging my nose. Slowly, drop by drop, I filled the lubricant tube until it was heavy with poison disguised as pleasure. I cleaned the nozzle meticulously, shook it lightly to make it look untouched, and smiled for the first time in weeks. Not a warm smile, a razor's smile. Returning to the SUV, I replaced the tube exactly where I had found it. Every detail, the angle of the seat, the floor mat, the glove compartment, was restored perfectly. Richard would never know until it was too late. But that was only the first step. Betrayal deserved more than private humiliation. It deserved exposure. And for that, I needed a stage. Back in the kitchen, I began setting my second trap. I placed a skillet of oil on the stove, tied a thin string to the igniter, and ran it toward the window, fastening it to an old coffee can I could pull from outside. It wasn't enough to destroy the house, just enough to create smoke. Thick and black, a signal to the neighbors. Enough to summon the fire department. Enough to summon Michael. The thought of my son pierced me with fresh pain. I hated what he would see. But I hated more the idea of him living a lie. Shackled to a wife who shared his father's bed. The truth would cut him open. But lies would kill him slowly. Better the knife than the poison. When I finally returned the SUV keys to the nightstand, Richard was still snoring, oblivious, his mouth slack, his body sprawled carelessly across the bed we once shared in love. I stood there for a long moment, staring down at him, the man who had once sworn to protect me. "Enjoy your sleep, Richard," I whispered, my voice flat, almost unfamiliar to my own ears. "Because when you wake, your world will burn." The morning of my plan, the world seemed too calm. The sun filtered softly through the lace curtains. Birds chirped in the maple trees outside, and the air carried the scent of freshly baked bread from the bakery down the block. A perfect day for disaster. I moved through the house with deliberate ease, performing the rituals of an ordinary wife. Coffee, toast, a kiss on the cheek as Richard mumbled something about another meeting. He didn't notice the spark in my eyes or the tension in my hands. He didn't notice that I was already gone, that what stood before him was not his wife, but his executioner. By mid-morning, I had taken my purse and walked across the street to Margaret Lee's house. My neighbor looked puzzled as I asked to sit by her front window, claiming I was waiting for a delivery. She didn't press. She poured me coffee and left me to stare at the house I had lived in for 40 years. At exactly 10 o'clock, a taxi pulled up. My breath caught as Vanessa stepped out, wearing a floral dress and oversized sunglasses, her hair cascading like she was walking into a date instead of my home. Richard opened the door quickly, scanning the street like a guilty man, then ushered her inside. My grip tightened on the coffee cup until it nearly cracked. I slipped my phone from my purse and connected to the hidden recorder I had planted in the bedroom. Instantly, laughter and muffled conversation filled my headphones. "All clear," Richard's voice rumbled. "We don't have to sneak around hotels anymore." Vanessa giggled, her voice dripping with mockery. "The old hag's gone, right?" The words sliced through me, but I forced myself to listen. Then came the sound I had been waiting for, the creak of the bed. A gasp, another giggle, then suddenly a shriek. "What the hell? I can't move." Vanessa's panic crackled in my ears. "Shut up," Richard hissed, his voice strained. It's just hold still, damn it." I smiled, cold and sharp, and tugged the string I had tied to the stove. From across the street, I watched black smoke billow from the kitchen window, curling into the sky like a signal flare. Margaret gasped, leaping to her feet. "Evelyn, your house, it's on fire." Outside, neighbors shouted, pointing, running for their phones. "Call the fire department," someone yelled. My heart pounded, not with fear, but with anticipation. And then, like a drumbeat of fate, I heard the wail of sirens. A red engine turned the corner, lights flashing, roaring down Maplewood Lane until it screeched to a halt in front of my house. And there he was. Michael, my son, my boy, dressed in his fire chief's uniform, barking orders, sledgehammer in hand. I clutched Margaret's arm, my vision blurring. My body wanted to collapse. To run, to stop this, but I forced myself still. The sound of splintering wood echoed as Michael led his crew through the front door. My headphones buzzed with chaos, Richard shouting, Vanessa sobbing, the sickening sound of sheets ripping as they struggled. Then Michael's voice, sharp and horrified. What the? Oh my God. Another firefighter's nervous laugh. They're stuck. Silence. Michael roared, his voice cracking. I pressed the headphones harder to my ears. Tears streaking down my face. My son had seen it. The truth was no longer mine alone, it was his. The shame, the betrayal, the filth of it all now lay bare in the open. Under the unforgiving light of day. Neighbors crowded around the lawn, whispering, gasping, some laughing in shock as Richard and Vanessa were carried out on stretchers. Sheets draped over their entwined bodies. Their faces were twisted with pain. Humiliation dripping off them like sweat. And in that moment, standing behind Margaret's curtain, I felt no pity, only the fierce, unyielding satisfaction of justice served. The ambulance doors slammed shut. Sirens wailing as it sped down Maplewood Lane. Neighbors stood in clusters, whispering, their eyes wide with disbelief. The husband and the daughter-in-law. Someone muttered, stuck together like animals. Laughter rippled through the crowd, sharp as knives. I followed in Margaret Lee's car, my hands folded tightly in my lap, my face a mask of shock for the world to see. Inside, though, my blood burned with something darker, triumph. At the hospital, chaos swirled around the emergency ward. Nurses hurried past with supplies. Firefighters explained the accident in clipped voices. I kept my distance, silent, watching like a shadow. Hours passed before a doctor finally appeared, sweat beading his forehead. Mrs. Carter? He asked cautiously. We managed to separate them. No permanent damage. They'll need ointments, rest, and, well, privacy. His eyes betrayed pity, maybe even judgment. I nodded, my lips trembling in what he must have thought was gratitude. A nurse handed me 2 tubes of medicated cream. Apply this twice a day, she said kindly. It will ease the pain. I smiled weakly, slipping them into my purse. But when no one was looking, I switched them for the mustard tubes I had hidden there. My hands didn't tremble. They moved with precision. Years of kneading dough giving me the same steady rhythm for this. My final act of seasoning. When I entered their room, Richard's face was pale, Vanessa's eyes swollen from crying. They wouldn't look at me, but I could feel their shame filling the space like smoke. Juliet, Richard's voice cracked. Desperate, I can explain. I cut him off with a single gesture, laying the mustard tubes on the table beside his bed. Here, I said evenly, for the burns. My eyes locked with his. And for the first time in decades, he looked away. I turned to leave, my footsteps measured, deliberate. Behind me, I heard the unmistakable sound of a cap twisting open. Seconds later, the hallway erupted with shrieks. It burns. God, it burns. Vanessa's voice tore through the sterile air, raw and ragged. Richard's curses followed, his voice breaking with panic. What the hell is this? Doctors and nurses rushed past me, their shoes squeaking on the tile. I didn't move, I just stood there, the faintest curl at the corner of my lips. Minutes later, the chaos subsided. I stepped back into the room, this time carrying a folder thick with papers. Inside were photographs, receipts, recordings, every piece of filth I had collected. And on top, divorce papers. Richard's eyes widened, his hands shook as he reached for them. Evelyn, please. 40 years. 40 years of lies. I spat, my voice low but lethal. It ends here. He looked to Vanessa, who sobbed into her hands. Then to me. For a moment, he seemed ready to beg. But something in my face, something cold, unmovable, stopped him. His shoulders slumped. Slowly, he signed his name. The pen scratched across the page, each stroke severing the last ties of a life I had once built with him. I gathered the papers, tucking them back into the folder with care. You will leave this house. You will leave my son. And you will never again touch what I built with my hands. Richard tried to speak, but no words came. Vanessa reached for Michael's name on her phone, her mascara streaking down her cheeks. But Michael never answered. He was gone, just as they had destroyed him. They had destroyed themselves. As I walked out of that hospital room, my heels clicking against the linoleum, I felt the strangest mixture of exhaustion and relief. I was hollowed out, burned to ash, but in that emptiness, there was victory. For the first time in 40 years, I was free. Weeks passed, but the echoes of that day never left Maplewood Lane. Neighbors still whispered, some in pity, some in awe, some in cruel amusement. Videos had circulated, grainy clips of Richard and Vanessa carried out on stretchers, their faces twisted in shame. For them, the scandal became gossip. For me and Michael, it became scars. Richard left the house with nothing but a suitcase and a hollow look. Vanessa vanished soon after. Her name spat like poison in every corner of town. I didn't care where they went. The bakery was mine again. The house mine again. But emptiness lingered, thick and heavy, clinging to the walls like smoke after a fire. Michael moved back in with me the very night of the hospital confrontation. He arrived with nothing but a duffel bag and eyes that looked far older than his 35 years. He didn't speak of Vanessa. He didn't curse his father. He simply set his bag down in his childhood room and said, "Mom, I'll help you with the bakery." His voice was steady, but I could hear the fracture beneath it. The next morning, for the first time in years, we opened the bakery together. I kneaded dough with the strength of muscle memory, while Michael stood at the counter. His broad shoulders bent over invoices and delivery calls. Customers streamed in, filling the air with chatter and the sweet smell of pastries. They smiled at me, patted my hand, whispered, "You're so strong, Evelyn." Strong. They said it like a compliment. But strength, I realized, isn't chosen. It's forced. Born from betrayal. Carved from pain. Strength was the only thing left when love had rotted away. At night, Michael and I ate dinner at the small kitchen table, rice and beans. Bread and coffee. Sometimes nothing more. The silence was different now. Not suffocating like with Richard, but heavy, healing. The silence of two people learning to breathe again. One evening, as I cleared the dishes, Michael's voice broke the quiet. "Mom," he said softly, "can you make flan this weekend?" He gave me a faint smile. The first I'd seen since his world collapsed. My throat tightened, but I managed to nod. "Yes, but you'll stir the caramel with me." For a moment, it felt like life was returning, not whole, not unbroken, but enough. I began carving out pieces of time for myself. Too, something I had never dared while married. I joined a cooking club at the community center, where women my age traded recipes and stories. I sat in church on Sunday mornings, light streaming through the stained glass windows, praying not for Richard, not for Vanessa, but for Michael, and for myself. For peace. Yet sometimes, late at night, I walked the quiet halls of the house, brushing my fingers against the photographs on the walls. Weddings, birthdays, holidays, all staged illusions now. I didn't take them down. I let them hang. Reminders of what betrayal costs. And of how lies can be hidden behind the prettiest frames. The bakery thrived. Orders doubled. Customers called me brave, resilient. But I knew the truth. I was not brave. I was a woman stripped bare, who clawed her way back with flour-dusted hands and a heart cracked beyond repair. Still, when I saw Michael laugh again, even faintly, when I watched the ovens glow warm in the early dawn, I realized something. They had tried to destroy me. They had tried to steal my life. But in the end, I kept the only things that mattered. My son, my work, myself. And sometimes, survival is victory enough.